Remember to support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and leaving a comment detailing your location and viewing time. This helps YouTube recommend similar stories. Now, let's begin our tale. With 19 years under my belt as a mortician at Riverside Memorial Services, I believed I had encountered every imaginable tragedy that could cross our threshold. Car accidents, sudden cardiac arrests, overdoses, suicides. Death manifests in myriad forms, each leaving an indelible mark on those who remain. However, one specific case from last March continues to haunt my nights, not because of the manner of death, but due to the unsettling events that unfolded afterward. Her name was Claire Whitmore, a 26-year-old resident of a tranquil suburb near Portland. The medical examiner's report was unambiguous: complications during an emergency cesarean section, uncontrolled internal bleeding that surgical interventions couldn't stem quickly enough. What should have been the pinnacle of joy became her final moment. Her infant daughter, whom they had intended to name Ember, also did not survive. Claire arrived at our facility on a Thursday evening in late March. The relentless spring rain, drumming against the preparation room windows, accompanied me as I reviewed her case file. Earlier that day, her husband, Ethan, had called, his voice a mere whisper, shattered by a grief that only raw loss can inflict. "Please," he pleaded, "make her beautiful." She was so excited to meet our daughter. She bought this dress. She wanted to wear it home from the hospital. Upon seeing Claire, I instantly comprehended Ethan's adoration. Even in death, her features radiated a subtle brilliance. High cheekbones, full lips that seemed to cradle a phantom smile, and thick, dark hair cascading over her shoulders like liquid shadow. Her skin possessed that porcelain quality often associated with significant blood loss, yet a lingering softness graced her features as if she had only momentarily closed her eyes. The extensive medical procedures had left considerable trauma to her abdomen, necessitating meticulous reconstruction before the embalming process could commence. As I worked, my thoughts drifted to the dreams she must have harbored during her pregnancy, the nursery they likely decorated, the tiny clothes they purchased, the names they deliberated over dinner. Ethan had indeed brought the dress she wished to wear home, a flowing yellow sundress adorned with delicate white floral embroidery along the neckline. It remained in its shopping bag, tag still attached, acquired months ago when their future seemed so assured. The receipt, dated early December, was still inside the bag. She had bought it during her second trimester, anticipating a spring homecoming that would tragically never materialize. I approached her preparation with extraordinary care. There's an intangible quality about maternal deaths that demands a heightened level of attention, a gentleness surpassing mere professional obligation. I found myself speaking to her as I worked, an uncommon practice for me with clients. It wasn't that I believed she could hear me, but the profound silence felt too oppressive given the immense loss. "Your husband loves you very much," I whispered as I continued the reconstruction. "He's going to miss you terribly." The embalming took longer than usual. The surgical trauma was extensive, and I was determined that everything be flawless for the viewing. Ethan had specifically requested an open casket service, despite recommendations from the funeral director. He needed to see her one last time, to properly bid farewell. As evening surrendered to night, I transitioned to cosmetic work. Ethan had supplied several photographs: Claire at their wedding, laughing at one of his jokes; Claire at a family barbecue, her hand protectively resting on her pregnant belly; Claire in their nursery, her face alight with pure joy as she assembled the crib. I scrutinized each image, noting her posture, the natural curve of her eyebrows, the gentle arc of her lips when she smiled. My duty was to offer Ethan one final glimpse of the woman he married, not merely the body that remained. By midnight, the primary reconstruction was complete, and I moved on to the finishing cosmetic touches. I styled her hair as it appeared in her wedding photo, applied makeup to restore a healthy glow to her cheeks, and meticulously positioned her hands. In the photographs, she frequently rested her right hand on her stomach, a protective gesture seemingly innate to expectant mothers. The yellow dress fit impeccably, draping gracefully over her now flat abdomen. I arranged the fabric with care, ensuring the delicate embroidery was visible, striving to make her as beautiful as Ethan remembered. Finally, I stepped back to assess my work. Claire looked serene, almost as if she were merely sleeping. The harsh fluorescent lights of the preparation room had been softened, lending a warmer cast to her skin. Everything was prepared for the following day's viewing. I covered her with a fresh white sheet, completed my final notes in the case file, and secured the facility. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I finally drove home through the deserted streets, the day's profound emotional weight settling in my chest like a heavy stone. I returned at 7 a.m. the next morning for final preparations before the family's arrival. The viewing was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I wanted absolute perfection. Ethan would have only one opportunity to say goodbye to his wife and daughter. The preparation room was precisely as I had left it, quiet, orderly, dimly illuminated by the emergency lighting that remained on overnight. I approached Claire's table and gently removed the sheet to confirm everything was still arranged as I had left it. That's when I noticed the first anomaly. Her right hand, which I had carefully positioned at her side, now rested on her abdomen, not just touching it, but cradling it in the same protective gesture I had observed in her pregnancy photos. Her fingers were slightly curved, as if she held something precious against her body. I stared at her hand for a prolonged moment, desperately trying to recall its exact position the previous night. I am meticulous about documentation and always photograph the final positioning before covering a body. I retrieved my phone and scrolled through the photos from the evening before. There it was, undeniable photographic proof that her hand had been at her side when I finished. Yet now it lay on her stomach, in a gesture achingly familiar from Ethan's photos. I checked the locks on the preparation room, secure. The security system reported no unauthorized entries. No one else had access to the facility overnight, and even if they had, why would anyone specifically move only her hand into such an intimate position? Bodies do not move after rigor mortis sets in, and Claire had been deceased for over 48 hours. But as I stood there, scrutinizing her placid face, I discerned something else that sent a shiver of disquiet through me. There were tear tracks on her cheeks, faint yet unmistakable, 2 delicate lines tracing from the corners of her closed eyes down to her jawline, as if she had been weeping. I gently touched one of the tracks with my fingertip. The skin was dry, but the evidence was clear. Post-mortem fluid leakage can occur, but not in this specific pattern, not in a way that so precisely mimicked tears of grief. And I had meticulously examined her face before covering her the night before. These tracks had not been there. I found myself backing away from the table, my heart pounding in my chest. In 19 years of mortuary work, I had never encountered anything like this. Bodies do not move. Bodies do not cry. There had to be a rational explanation. But as I stood there trying to process what my eyes were telling me, I heard something that sent an icy dread through my veins. A sound emanated from elsewhere in the room, soft, rhythmic, muffled. It took me a moment to identify it, and when I did, the hair on the back of my neck bristled. It was crying, the soft, desperate cry of a newborn baby. I spun around, frantically scanning the preparation room. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the walls in a manner that made pinpointing its source impossible. But it was undeniably there, the unmistakable mewling cry of an infant in need of comfort. The sound lasted for perhaps 10 seconds, then dissolved into silence. I stood there in the sudden quiet, my hands trembling, wondering if I was losing my sanity. The stress of the profession, the sleep deprivation, the emotional weight of Claire's case. Perhaps it was all finally overwhelming me. I forced myself to take a deep breath and again approached the table. Claire lay exactly as before, her hand still protectively on her abdomen, the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. I reached for a tissue to gently wipe away the evidence, but as my hand neared her face, something incredible occurred. Her lips moved. Not a pronounced movement, just the faintest parting, as if she were about to speak. But it was enough to make me stumble backward, knocking over a small tray of instruments that clattered to the floor with a sound like splintering glass. I stared at her face, waiting for any further sign of movement, but she remained motionless. Just that one tiny motion, so fleeting I might have imagined it. Yet, combined with everything else I had witnessed, I knew I hadn't imagined anything. The baby's cry came again, louder this time, imbued with an urgency that resonated deep within my chest. It was the cry of a child who sought her mother, who was lost and afraid, calling out for the only person who could console her. Instinctively, I found myself speaking to Claire. "She's looking for you," I whispered. "Ember is looking for her mama." The instant I uttered the name, the crying ceased. The ensuing silence was so absolute, it felt as though the entire world had paused to listen. And in that profound stillness, I was convinced I detected the faint cadence of a heartbeat. Not Claire's, which had been quiescent for days, but a sound more delicate, swifter, and more fragile. The duration of my vigil, straining to perceive something that defied existence, remains unknown. It might have been mere minutes, or potentially hours. Time, in that hushed chamber where the impossible incrementally became an undeniable truth, seemed to have dissolved all meaning. Eventually, I distinguished footsteps in the hallway outside. Ethan and his family had arrived for the viewing. I swiftly tidied the room, repositioned the displaced instruments, and re-examined Claire one final time. Her hand remained cradled on her abdomen, yet the tracks of tears had inexplicably vanished, leaving her countenance serene and peaceful. Whatever occurrences transpired in those early morning hours appeared to have receded, leaving behind only unanswerable inquiries. Ethan entered first, supported by an elderly woman I presumed to be his mother. He approached Claire's casket with measured steps, his face a mask of barely contained sorrow. Upon seeing her, he emitted a soft sob and extended his hand to hers, the one resting on her stomach. "She looks beautiful," he whispered, his voice fracturing. "She looks like she's just sleeping." He remained there for several minutes, clasping her hand and conversing with her in Spanish. Though I couldn't comprehend the words, the depth of love in his tone was universally clear. Finally, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I love you, mi amor," he murmured. "Take care of our Ember until I can see you both again." As he straightened, his expression shifted. He subtly tilted his head as if attuned to something perceptible only to him. "Do you hear that?" he inquired, his eyes wide as he looked at me. I listened intently, and there it was again, faint but unmistakably present. The soft cooing of a contented baby, no longer weeping, but emanating the peaceful sounds of an infant who had discovered solace in her mother's embrace. Ethan's face underwent a remarkable transformation. The overwhelming grief didn't dissipate entirely, but it was now interlaced with something new: wonder, tranquility, perhaps even elation. "She has her," he declared, tears streaming down his face. "Claire has our baby." The other family members gathered around the casket, and I deliberately receded, granting them a moment of privacy. Over the subsequent hour, as they offered their farewells, the delicate baby sounds persisted intermittently. Not everyone appeared to perceive them. The older relatives seemed oblivious, but Ethan's younger sister made the sign of the cross and softly whispered a prayer. As the viewing concluded and the family prepared to depart, Ethan approached me. "Thank you," he stated, gripping my hand firmly. "I don't know what you did, but thank you. I can feel that they're together now. I can feel that she's not alone." I was at a loss for words. How could I elucidate something I myself failed to comprehend? Instead, I simply nodded and conveyed that it had been an honor to attend to Claire. After the family's departure, I re-entered the preparation room one last time. Claire's body would be transferred to the chapel for the funeral service the following day, but I desired a few solitary moments with her first. She lay peacefully in her yellow dress, her hand still resting upon her stomach in that protective gesture. The tear tracks were gone. Her face was serene and exquisite. However, as I stood there, I noticed something I had previously overlooked. On the fabric of her dress, directly over her heart, was a small, damp spot. It was not large enough to have been conspicuous during the viewing, but it was evident upon close inspection. I touched it gently. It was warm and subtly moist, like freshly shed tears. Yet Claire's eyes were dry, and I was the sole other individual in the room. I covered her with the sheet one final time and whispered a farewell, hoping somehow she might hear. As I pivoted to leave, the baby's sounds emerged once more. They were not cries now, but the soft, rhythmic breathing of a child who had finally found repose. Claire Whitmore was laid to rest the subsequent afternoon in the Catholic cemetery just outside of town. Ethan selected a headstone with ample space for two names, Claire's and Ember's, bearing identical dates for both their births and deaths. Beneath, he had inscribed a single line, "Together forever." I attended the funeral service, an uncommon practice for me with clients. As the priest expounded on eternal love and divine reunion, I found my thoughts returning to what I had witnessed in that quiet preparation room. The rational facet of my mind still sought explanations, proposing settling sounds within the building, my own emotional projection, or stress-induced hallucinations. Yet, deep within, I knew my experience was genuine. Not supernatural in any spectral sense, but real in a manner that transcended my grasp of life and death. Claire had been a mother for only a few fleeting moments before the loss of her daughter. But somehow, that bond had proven more resilient than death itself. In the ensuing weeks, I engaged in online research for similar cases. Narratives of mothers who had succumbed in childbirth, testimonials from morticians and funeral directors who had encountered inexplicable phenomena. The accounts exhibited striking consistency. Infant cries in empty rooms, protective gestures from deceased mothers, indications that the maternal connection persisted beyond the grave. Most of these narratives were dismissed as folklore or stress-related hallucinations. However, having personally experienced it, I began to question if we had been too hasty in rationalizing away something that science was simply unequipped to quantify. 3 months subsequent to Claire's funeral, Ethan visited the funeral home. He appeared improved, still grieving, yet no longer bearing the oppressive burden of complete despair. He presented me with a photograph, an ultrasound image of Ember that he had kept in his wallet. "I wanted you to see her," he stated. "I wanted you to know who you helped bring peace to." I scrutinized the blurry black and white image, endeavoring to discern features within the shadowy outline. Ember would have been beautiful, just like her mother. "I still hear them sometimes," Ethan said softly. "At night, when I'm falling asleep, Claire is singing lullabies to Ember. It should make me sad, but it doesn't. It makes me feel like they're safe." After his departure, I remained in my office for an extended period, contemplating the intrinsic nature of love and loss. In my profession, I encounter grief in all its manifestations: the bitter anger of an unforeseen death, the relief that trails a protracted illness, the crushing guilt of those left behind. But Claire's situation was distinct. It was grief transmuted into something else, something that felt more akin to completion than an ending. That night, I drove past the cemetery where Claire and Ember were interred. The headstone was barely discernible in the darkness, but I could spot fresh flowers, yellow roses that Ethan must have placed earlier that day. As I sat in my car, I thought I detected something carried on the night wind. Singing, soft and sweet and infinitely tender. A lullaby sung by a mother to console her child. I have served as a mortician for nearly 2 decades now. I have prepared bodies for families from every social stratum, witnessed grief in all its diverse forms, and assimilated the profound meaning in aiding people through the act of saying goodbye. I comprehend the complex chemistry of preservation, the delicate artistry of restoration, and the crucial equilibrium between revering the deceased and comforting the living. But Claire Whitmore imparted a distinct lesson. She demonstrated that certain connections transcend the perceived boundaries between life and death. Not as phantoms or spirits or any supernatural phenomenon, but as something simpler and more profound. The reverberation of love continuing to resonate long after all else has fallen silent. Sometimes, in the quiet moments of my work, that sound returns to me, the gentle cooing of an infant who had found her way back to her mother's embrace, and I am reminded that my profession extends beyond merely preparing bodies for burial. Occasionally, it involves assisting souls in finding their ultimate journey home. Ethan remarried 2 years later to a compassionate woman named Rachel Monroe, who understood that she was not supplanting Claire, but rather joining a family that would forever cherish her memory. They had a son, whom they named Owen, and annually, on Ember's birthday, they visit the cemetery together to leave yellow roses and recount stories about the mother and sister they never met, yet whose presence they will never forget. I frequently reflect upon Claire, particularly when engaged in cases involving young mothers. I now listen with heightened attentiveness and pay heed to nuances I might have previously disregarded. And occasionally, just occasionally, I discern things that reaffirm that love truly is more potent than death. Not in any mystical sense, but in the straightforward, profound manner that the bonds we forge in life continue to shape us long after our physical departure. The yellow dress Claire never had the opportunity to wear home from the hospital was donated to a women's shelter, where it hopefully brought solace to someone else embarking on a new chapter. Ethan retained only one item, a small bracelet Claire had been wearing when she passed away, adorned with a single charm shaped like a tiny baby shoe. For Ember, he explained to me when he came to collect Claire's personal effects, so she'll always know her mama was thinking about her. In my filing cabinet, I keep Claire's case folder alongside all the others. However, hers is distinguished by a small yellow sticky note, not for any official protocol, but as a reminder of the day I discovered that some enigmas do not necessitate resolution, but merely witnessing. Some would contend that I imagined every event that transpired in that preparation room on that March morning. The rational part of my mind has furnished countless explanations over the years. Yet in the hushed moments before dawn, when the world is still and the demarcation between day and night seems most ethereal, I know with certainty that what I experienced was real. Claire found her daughter, and in that reunion, she taught me that love does not cease when the heart no longer beats. Instead, it undergoes a transformation, evolving into a force capable of spanning any expanse, surmounting every impediment, and merging spirits across the chasm dividing this existence from the afterlife. This understanding transcends the boundaries of science or religious doctrines, defying classification within any known philosophical framework. It is, quite simply, the undeniable reality I observed in a serene setting, where the profound affection of a mother demonstrated its invincibility even against the finality of death.